Great, thank you so much for sticking around for TBOY, the best one yet. That's right, 6 o'clock, here we are. My name is Patrick. I'm a core contributor to Moola Protocol, which is a borrowing and lending application built on the Celo network. I'm going to talk with you about a pilot project that we have that we anticipate launching over the next few weeks in Kenya. I'll also do a short demonstration of what mobile crypto looks like. If you were here a couple of talks ago, there was a great slide that was showing Web 2 adoption relative to Web 3 adoption, and there was a great illustration of smartphone penetration relative to Ethereum-based wallets. And our thesis is that in the same way that many folks in developing nations skipped over landlines and went straight to mobile, many folks are going to skip over a traditional financial system, and they're going to come straight to us. They're going to come straight into Web3 because, frankly, we have a better set of products, and we're able to get it to where they are. So I think it'd be helpful to take a second and look at the technology stack that we're working with. So at the base layer, Moola is composed on top of the Celo network, which is a carbon-negative, EVM-compatible proof-of-stake blockchain. Mainnet launched on Earth Day almost 2 years ago, has had 100% uptime, and it's built really from the ground up to be optimized for mobile devices. And what that manifests, how that manifests, is in a number of different ways. So, for example, you have the option to map your phone number to a public key. What this means is that we can tap into social networks. Once you've mapped your phone number, you can import your contact list, and you can see who else is also already on the network. We can also expand through social networks. So I can text any of you in this room Celo dollars or Celo euros, and even if you've never used the network before, you get a text message that essentially prompts you to verify your phone number, which is done in a decentralized way using the validator set. Once you have verified your phone number, then we have an ability to release the funds that I texted to you from the escrow smart contract into your newly created wallet. The Celo network also has built in a native stability mechanism that uses cryptocurrencies to collateralize the value of the stablecoins. So, for example, the Celo reserve is composed of the Celo native asset, Bitcoin, as well as Ether, and it also has a carbon offset token, which is quite interesting. It's interesting because what this enables is a crypto economic incentive mechanism to see more of the things that we want to see in the world. So, for example, what that means is that as demand for these tokens increases, so too does demand for the assets that are backing it. So as the circulating supply increases, demand for Bitcoin, demand for Ether, as well as demand for carbon offsets, which means that the chain itself and the circulating supply of stablecoins are directly contributing to offsetting carbon. The Celo ecosystem also recently launched something called the Climate Initiative, which is setting the intention of adding real-world assets to the reserve, specifically tokenized versions of old-growth forests and rainforests. And it's really based on this idea that why don't we back money with things that we want to see more of in the world? It's a very interesting crypto economic experiment that we're running. Moola is on the application layer, so it's a borrowing and lending protocol, has shared ancestry with Aave version 2. And all of this is accessible through front doors, mobile wallets like the Valora wallet, which has a very similar look and feel to Venmo. So let's see what this looks like. So what we have here is something I recorded on my mobile device. Moola is accessible through any web browser. We chose to make this accessible through web browsers first as opposed to a native application in order to prevent censorship and enable anybody who has an internet-connected device to access the system. So what you do is first connect your wallet, I skipped that step, and then initiate a deposit. So in this case, what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna deposit 100 Celo dollars. So I type in the amount. I'm then prompted to confirm the transaction. This is happening in real time, so now I'm signing the transaction with my mobile wallet. You could also do this through a dApp browser through MetaMask or I'mToken. And now I've made a deposit. Now that I have collateral in the system, I'm gonna borrow 25 euros. So I'm gonna swap to euros, input the quantity. I'm going to adjust this to a stable rate to lock it in. And then down here, oh, excuse me, darn it. Let's see if I can, there we go. So what we have here is basically a synopsis of this loan that I'm taking, showing my health factor, liquidation threshold, the price at which I could be liquidated, as well as the current price, the interest rate mode, and the interest rate that we're getting. And I confirm the transaction, again, sign the transaction using my wallet, and within a few seconds, 5-second average block time, we should see a prompt showing that the funds have been deposited into my wallet. There it is. So now let's talk about DeFi and emerging markets and why this makes sense, this type of technology. So if we look at DeFi lending relative to community-based lending, there are some very clear advantages. Microfinance, for example, which has been around for a very long time, you don't have to have a credit history, but you may not be able to get an immediate loan. You may not have access to large capital pools. Also, the interest rates tend to be less favorable than what we can do with DeFi lending protocols. Payday loans, you don't need credit history. You do get immediate access. You may or may not have access to a large capital pool, but the interest rates can be really unfavorable. The telcos have gotten very involved through M-Pesa and other initiatives, but you have to have a credit history. You don't get an immediate loan, don't necessarily have access to large amounts of capital, but the interest rates can be favorable. Traditional banks absolutely need a credit history in order to get a loan. You typically don't get funding immediately. You do have access to large capital pools, and the interest rates can be favorable. But we look at the bottom row here, we can see that DeFi outperforms them all. No credit history required, immediate funding, very large capital pools, and favorable interest rates. So this is the current process for the employer-based lending model that we are essentially going to replace with our DeFi-based lending model. So we're working with an employer in Kenya that employs farmers as well as other manual laborers, and they typically do $100 to $500 loans for 3 to 6 months, 10 years, 12 to 13% is generally the cost of the loan. But the problems are that it's a very manual process, it's very paper-based, it requires a lot of identification, which folks may or may not have, and it also has pretty significant costs. And so this is the model that we are replacing it with. It's a pretty dense slide, but let's walk through it together. On the right-hand side are the steps. On the left-hand side is visually what's happening. So in this scenario, the employee rather, is going to borrow and repay $100. So step one is that the employer is depositing collateral into the DeFi protocol, into Moola. Step two, or excuse me, they also are delegating their credit. So what that means is that when you make a deposit into the borrowing and lending protocol, you can borrow against your collateral, which is what I demoed earlier. If you don't want to borrow against your collateral, you can assign your borrowing capacity to another address. So in this case, what the employer is doing is that they are delegating their borrowing capacity to their employees, essentially leveraging their balance sheet to give their employees the equivalent of unsecured loans. So the employee now has an ability to withdraw from the liquidity pool. So step two is that they take a loan. There's an assumption here that the employer and the employee have determined how long the loan is. And if the employee, they have two options. They can either repay the loan plus interest, that would be step three, or they don't. What happens if they don't repay the loan? Again, it's unsecured. Uh, what happens is that the employer has an ability to essentially garnish their wages or deduct a certain percentage of their wage over a period of time until they're made whole. At the moment, the payroll aspect of this is being done off-chain. For the pilot project, we're not going to also handle the payroll. However, we do have a very clear roadmap to work with protocols like Remox to provide a streaming payroll service, as well as automating the garnishment phase if the employee does not repay. So essentially, the employer is in a position where they have inside information that allows them to underwrite these loans. What do they know? They know how long the employee has worked for them. They know how much the employee makes. And so they're able to essentially leverage this information to make underwriting decisions, which an outside third party may not be able to infer the same type of information and determine the credit worthiness. So the risk here is that the employee takes the loan and then quits. If there's no more money owed to the employee, then essentially that would be a default. So that's the risk to the employer. But assuming that they either repay it or they're able to reclaim it through the wages that are owed to the employee, then the employer is able to earn interest on their capital, and they're also able to give their employees a very favorable rate. So I'm very excited to see how this pilot plays out. There's another piece that's actually missing here. Because we're doing this in Kenya, most folks are using feature phones, and they're doing it through M-Pesa. So there's actually another step in here that I left off of this slide, where the CUSD is going to a wallet provider called Katani Pay, and Katani Pay is an off-ramp into M-Pesa. So there's one more step, taking the Celo dollars into M-Pesa. The employee then repays the M-Pesa, and Katani Pay then repays the Celo dollars. So that's the flow of funds. The benefits here are for the employer. They get lower administrative burdens. They're able to save time. It is very easy to track what's happened because this is happening on chain. They can leverage this as essentially a perk to acquire new farmers, hire new employees. They also are earning interest on their money because it's going into a money market protocol. If they want to get fancy, they could even go yield farm. But that's outside the scope of what we're going to be attempting to achieve with them. On the employee side, from the employee perspective, they get a very low interest loan. They are essentially able to smooth out their income by borrowing when they need additional capital. They can access it through mobile, and they get their money immediately. So again, this is one of the approaches that we're taking to bring mobile crypto to emerging markets. I'm very excited about this. If this sort of thing also gets you excited, feel free to join us. If you've got an idea for a proof of concept, a pilot project that we could do, we're certainly open to that. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.